Hello there, cultists, and welcome to the special episode of Cult Classics. Today, I'm joined by a man with an impressive resume containing such titles as Tron, The Fox and the Hound, and The Brave Little Toaster. He's a writer, director, animator, Imagineer, and Disney alum. It's Mr. Jerry Rees. Welcome.
Hey, nice to see you, DK. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
Anytime. I appreciate you, as I say, I appreciate you taking the time. How are you today?
Doing okay. Just juggling a lot of sort of crazy things, and it's delightful to take a break and hang out with you in the middle of all this craziness.
Oh, fantastic. What's the weather like where you are? We've had a pretty torturous summer over here, but I imagine it was a similar situation where you are.
It has been, but it's remarkably mild today. It's in the 70s, believe it or not, Fahrenheit, and where it's been like 107, and I'm not joking. And then I would go visit my brother in the adjoining town, and it was 113. And I had to climb on the roof and deal with an air conditioner, actually, in the 113 weather. But today,
Right.
it's in the 70-degree range. So it's quite a mild day, shockingly. So,
Yeah.
so it's nice.
Well, I mean, all eyes are on the US right now for the election. Are you feeling that that's pretty much everywhere right now on the TV and things like that?
Oh, yeah, it's saturated. And I'm very busy with a bunch of other things at the same time, so it's kind of good that it keeps my mind on 20 other things.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, we do have the holiday season rapidly approaching as well. So are you all geared up for that, or do you generally leave it until the last moment?
You know, the rest of my family, my wife Rebecca, and just all the rest of our family gets very geared into it and sets up for it and everything. And I usually am just happily swept along with them. So I'll be blindsided by everything. It's like, what holiday is it? I didn't know that. It's like, yes, we're getting together tomorrow. Oh, okay. So happily, that's they keep me on target with the calendar, with everything, holidays, birthdays, etc. I can depend on them to alert me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, hopefully it'll take folks' minds off their own Christmas shopping by delving into your career. So if it's okay with you, I'll get right down to it.
Okay, let's take the ride, which is, by the way, still going on.
Great.
I have some dear friends who have retired. I have not yet retired, so.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's good to hear. Good to hear. Well, I mean, first off, it is a corny question, but it's one we ask all our guests on the show. What was the deciding factor that made you want to get into the animation or movie business? Was it something that you found yourself drifting towards through circumstance, or was there a defining moment where you said, that's what I want to do?
Gosh, there was it was sort of both. There was sort of a gravity that was pulling me towards it in many ways. I loved fine art. I was really intrigued the more and more that I got a glimpse of animation. And I remember one night when I was a kid, we were driving home from my aunt and uncle's house, and my dad was going over a freeway overpass, and there was a drive-in theater screen that we could see from the top of that bridge. And on the drive-in theater screen at night, it was playing Pinocchio, the Disney animated feature. And it was the scene where Monstro the whale was chasing them. And I had never seen Pinocchio before. And I asked my dad, please pull over to the side of the road. And so he pulled over and put on his blinkers, and I rolled down the window and was just looking out into the night sky. I was sort of up on the bridge, was eye level with the drive-in theater screen, and watched that amazing scene that wound up with Pinocchio face down in the water, seemingly dead at the end of it. And so I said, please, can we go to the next showing? And a big complicating factor is I had been raised in a very conservative little town, very religious town, and they taught that going to movies was a sin. So I had never been to a theater, and so that was a big decision point for my dad to decide he was going to take the risk of actually going into a theater. At least it was a drive-in. So he did agree, and we went in and checked into the next screening at the drive-in theater. And he was sort of like slinking down in the seats, and nobody else would see us going in. And so I sat and watched from our car at the drive-in theater the entirety of Pinocchio, and I was just astounded at the artistry and the strength of the storytelling and the cinematic strength, and just the emotional draw that something like that had, the reality that it presented. And so I just that was a pretty much a defining moment. And so I found every single way that I could to be exposed to as much Disney animation as possible. And in the meantime, I had been really focusing on doing fine art portraiture and stuff. So I was intrigued by John Singer Sargent and Norman Rockwell and Leyendecker and the Gibson, people like that, and was really practicing portraits of human beings, but very realistically, and but a lot of times with strong emotions. So the school I went to, Loma Linda Academy, had no particular art program. So, but they had an art teacher that pretty much taught art history to a degree, and then let people just kind of do their own thing. And she would give simple assignments. And so I was the most sort of, I would say, ambitious art student that she had. So she would just kind of ask me what I wanted to do in a semester. So I would give her something like, well, I want to do really detailed portraits, but not of people solemnly sitting there, but some extreme emotion. I'd like somebody just crying, weeping, or laughing their head off, but do it as a real detailed portrait. And she'd go, "Oh, okay, that's your assignment for the semester." And so she would just let me do my thing, and other people were doing stuff like painting a rock, going out and get a rock and paint a little tree on it or something. And, oh, that's a nice little paperweight. And it's like, how are you doing with the portraits, Jerry? So thankfully she, really let me sort of steer my own path. And then I got just an extraordinary kind of an accidental circumstance where I found a path into the exposure to Disney. I just to actually connect with Disney. I had no idea how to get there. I felt so separated from that. Not only growing up in a town where you were not supposed to go to movies anyway, so I was cheating on that, and I was secretly watching as much as possible. Um, but then it was a very small town, and I'll tell you, years later when I went to Burbank, California, I thought that was the big city. And then after going to make the Brave Little Toaster in Taipei, Taiwan, I thought even New York, I thought was a little city. So I was like, my perspective really changed over the years. But in this little town, I had no idea of how to get anywhere like Disney or even Burbank. And so I was just trying to do animation at home. I had gotten the Walter T. Foster animation book. I think Preston Blair had some wonderful animation how-tos in it. And so I was just trying to teach myself at home. And we had ordered Acme paper. My parents helped me buy it when I was a kid. And I ordered, Acme peg bars, and I was drawing, and we had a little Super 8 movie camera. And so I put a tripod in my living room and was down shooting at it and stuff. And so I got a camera. I would mow lawns and do things like that to raise money. But my mom and dad went in halves with me to get the camera, probably more than half on their part. But so I was making little animated films in my living room as best I could. But pretty soon I couldn't afford the paper anymore. It was too expensive. Even with my parents helping, they said, "Look, we can't keep buying reams of this Acme paper. It's just too expensive." So my mom found a paper press it was a place that manufactured paper, and they would sell it to us at a much reduced price with no holes punched in it. And so then I had to find out how to get holes punched in it. And there was a university, Loma Linda Medical University, had an audiovisual department, and that was in my hometown. And so I talked to somebody that worked there to see if I could use their industrial strength hole punch that they used for their media division. So they saw me as a kid, and my mom had driven me there, and I asked permission, and they said, "Oh, okay, when we're not using it, you can punch that ream of paper." So I was doing that, and then I was caught by the head of the department, and he stopped me. "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, they told me I could punch my paper here." I said, "Why are you punching paper?" So I told him I was doing animation, and he just said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Well, I am." And he went, "No, you need a downshooter Oxbury camera stand, and you need this and that." And he would list all this stuff off to me, and said, "There's the exit." So, so I had at least punched the one ream of paper and left with that. And my mom told me, actually, quite a few years later, when I was an adult, she said she still remembered that event because she was standing in the doorway watching this guy tell her child, "You can't do that." And so she said that when I got back in the car, she said, "Well, how do you feel about that? What that guy said to you?" And she told me, I don't remember this, but she told me, I turned to her and said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about." So she was very happy that I had the confidence, right? Um, so I then eventually ran out of that paper, and I had to go back and punch more paper. So I snuck in the side door that they had showed me, and the guy wasn't there, but then he caught me again. So now he's really was like, "Okay, what's going on?" And I said, "Look, I don't have an Oxbury stand, but I have a tripod, and I put weights on it, and I put a ribbon across the living room so my family knows it's a hot set." And I did this whole thing. So he said, "Well, let me see what you're doing." So I brought in my little projector, and I put up a white cardboard, and I projected on that. And boy, did his attitude change. He went from "you can't do it" to, he said, "Did you is that yours? Did you do that? You didn't trace it? That's your animation?" And I said, "Yeah, I was trying to mimic the dancing penguins from Mary Poppins." And so then he just was supportive, and he just immediately changed the conversation to having seen somebody from the Disney animation department giving a talk somewhere. And he said they have veterans that have been there since the Snow White days that are getting close to retirement age. And they're starting to look for young people to come in and learn from them before they retire. So he wrote down a phone number on a piece of paper, ripped it off, and he said, "Here's the phone number to Ed Hansen, who's the production manager of the Disney Feature Animation Department, if you want to talk to them." So this guy who said, "You can't do that," handed me the most important piece of paper in my life. It was the phone number to direct call into the Disney Feature Animation Department, which was to me like Mars. So I call, and the production manager said, "Hello, Ed Hansen." I was like, "I'm 16 years old." So I told him my story, and he's like, "Oh, have your parents drive you down, and we'll take a look at what you're doing." And so my dad drove me there, and he waited in the lobby while I went in to see Ed Hansen. And Ed Hansen took me up to meet Eric Larson, who was one of Walt's legendary Nine Old Men. And so Eric looked through my portfolio, and they liked the portraits and stuff, and they liked the animation. And they just said, "Well, so you're in high school?" It's like, "Yeah, junior in high school. I have one more year to go in high school." And so they just said, "Well," Eric said, "Well, here, this will be your desk. So whenever you have a break from high school, we have a vacation, a few days off, whatever, this is your desk, and you can come in and do some tests, and I'll give you pointers and stuff." So I'm like, "Okay." And it's just astounding. It was an amazing sudden change of fortune where I was just really, really trying in a little town where they had said movies are sin. and I was just so mesmerized by the power and artistry and beauty and emotional strength and sort of timelessness that I had felt from Disney. And I had gotten a chance to, I had actually gotten to rent um, Bambi to show to a youth group, because I convinced them, well, if you're not going to a movie theater, if you're like, I'll show it in the church, like in the extra room of the church, and I'll show Bambi. So they're like, oh, okay. So I rented a 16 millimeter print of Bambi and showed it to people actually in the church. So, and they were moved by how beautiful it was. So I was sort of trying to change the culture a bit, but to suddenly go from being this lone voice in that culture of stay away, it's wrong, to and making some progress, to suddenly just having at Disney, where my dreams had been to somehow connect with them, to say, here's your desk and here's your mentor, and was just astounding. So then I just would go in anytime I had a break in high school, and then after the the finishing my junior year, and then going quite a bit during the summer, and then my senior year, they let me know that they were going to start something called the CalArts Character Animation Program, and asked me if I'd like to be teacher's assistant for year one and be a student and teacher's assistant for that first year. And I said, yeah, that would be amazing. But, I looked at the price tag and just said, we couldn't possibly afford that. So they just said, well, we'll give you a scholarship and we'll pay for it. So after finishing the junior and senior year in high school and mentoring with Eric, uh, I spent that first summer after I graduated high school. I immediately went and just spent the entire summer prepping for year one of CalArts. And so I was finding scenes to take out there for that I thought my fellow students would love to flip through the animation scenes from the classics. And so it was amazing to be able to go just talk to the people. They called it the morgue, believe it or not, but it was the archive of the original animation from all the features. So you could make a call down to the morgue and say, that amazing scene where, Jiminy Cricket is trying to catch up with Pinocchio, and he's running and talking to him and putting his coat on and everything. And it says on the draft here of the movie that Milt Kahl animated that. Would you send the drawings to my room? And so they send the original drawings. It come up on a cart with just cardboard and rubber bands around it, and you'd open it up carefully, and it was the original pencil drawings that Milt Kahl had done for Pinocchio. And so you'd flip through and just be amazed to learn how he did it. And uh, I would then take selected scenes like that to the Xerox department, and they had a gigantic Xerox machine that was actually three different rooms. One that would take the initial image, and one that would process it, and one that would print it out on the page. And so you'd wind up with a stack of drawings that were on the custom Disney size paper with the custom Disney peg system, perfectly registered, that looked 95% like the original art. I mean, it got really close. And so then we'd pack that up in the same kind of package that the original was in, and then I would hand copy the exposure sheets. So I'd look at the original exposure sheet that Milt had sent to the camera department and go, okay, it's this many pages long, and it looks like he used a black 2B pencil for this. It looked like he used a 6B pencil for this part. It looks like he used a heliotrope pencil for this part. And so I would get a bunch of pencils and really try to do the exact copy of how the exposure sheet was written out, including the sort of modulation for voice work and everything, where they would do little scratch marks that are the equivalent of how it looks on your screen today. And and then doing artwork to put on the walls and taking calls from people. So I remember the first time I talked to John Musker and talked to Brad Bird. They were calling into the studio, getting ready to come out and be my fellow students. And I got to meet people as I was working at the studio. I was assisting Jack Hanna for that summer before we even went out. So got to meet some of my fellow students, and then we went out and did the CalArts thing, and that was quite an adventure. And just the cliff notes on that is, after 2 years, they asked for four of us to just come start working full time. So they yanked four of us out of the program to just become full time animators, and so we never got a degree. So it was me and Brad Bird and John Musker and Doug Leffler. And then they grabbed Henry Selick from the experimental animation class, and so none of us finished college because we were drafted by the studio to just start working. So we said farewell to all our fellow students and jetted over to the studio and just started working. So that was an adventure. So that's a long-winded answer to your question of was there a key moment? Sorry.
That's brilliant, actually, because you covered about 4 questions I was going to ask. So yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I was going to say the CalArts must have been just a hotbed of creativity. Do you have any fond memories of being part of that dynamic, you and your classmates?
Oh yeah, it was kind of amazing. It just was it was kind of a mixed message you got when you got out there to CalArts. For and I think the story was practically the same for all of us. Where in our hometowns, we were unusual people. So it's like, I was the only one in my hometown that was interested in animation and trying to become an animator and doing anything to sort of study that or try to become good at it. And the same thing was true for Brad Bird and John Musker and Lasseter and the various people that we wound up being fellow students together. Like they had similar stories. So you went from this status in your hometown as being kind of special. And CalArts, it was like you were nothing special because it's like, yeah, oh, everybody did that. Oh, we all wanted to be animators. And then it got to be like, oh, you only saw Pinocchio 5 times. I saw Pinocchio 15 times. And it was all this jousting of like who knew more Disney trivia and all of that. So it was like a real change of pace for all of us to suddenly be awash in people that were exactly like us. Instead of being the different ones, we were all the same. And then it was just really fun, amazing camaraderie that developed, and there is sort of equal parts jousting and then just supporting each other and helping and exploring. And but some crazy stuff happened like that first year. Brad Bird and I in particular uh, really felt like we were soulmates and wanted to make a film together. So we made a pact that we were going to co-author our first year film as 2 animators joining together to make a bigger project. And so it would be both of our films spliced together as one bigger story because we were determined to make a film together. And we did a lot of the year that way, and it looked like we were on target to do that. And then Jack, like far into the year, finally figured out what we were doing, and we thought he was aware. We were just, he was so kind of laid back. It was very different from the vibe than we had gotten in the studio. So when I was mentoring with Eric Larson, Eric was really proactively pushing me to think about my own characters and to observe life and bring my observations into the animation world and not just copy them. And when I would do attempts, he would give me very specific guidance of how to be more explorative and more expressive in my work and everything. Jack was much more kind of laid back and just was like, well, everybody do a cocky little walk from Donald Duck and like, that'll be it. And we're like, no, we want to make a movie. So we were pushing past the simplicity of the assignment that he had given, which was not, we didn't feel like the challenge that the veterans were giving us. Although, he was a veteran, but it was a different vibe than what came from Frank and Ollie and Milt and Eric and Mark Davis, and those guys were, much more like compelling you to really challenge yourself. So we thought that everything was fine, but far deep into the year, Jack finally figured out that Brad and I were co-making a film and said, no, you can't do that. We're like, what? We've been doing this whole year planning. It's like, nope, you can't. You have to do your own piece. So suddenly, it just jolted us. And so we separated our projects, and I just started over and did some simple thing with Brer Rabbit. And I felt so horrible when I was done with my first year and I showed them my film. And, here I had been, I came in at 16. I was mentored personally by Eric. And then at the end of my first year at CalArts, I have just a very short little simple thing with Brer Rabbit, and I felt awful, but I couldn't stand up on the stage and tell them the story. Like, we had something ambitious, but Jack said no. Um, but anyway, I survived. And then the second year, at least I knew like, okay, even though Brad and I want to do this, we all have to do our separate things. So the second year I did a much better job of pacing myself through to have just do a solo film. And Brad did the same. And so at the end of that second year, we were 2 out of the 4 that were drafted to go work full time. So after a bumpy start that first year, we were like on the fast track after that from the second year. But Brad and I went through a very interesting thing together when we visited the studio, because once, I had been at the studio for some time before CalArts started. I didn't know this, but at the time, around the same time when he was in his last high school year or two, he had come in, and his connection into the studio was Milt Call. So I had been going to visit Eric. He had been going in. I don't know if we ever crossed paths or not in those earlier times. That we didn't notice it, but he was going in to visit Milt Call. So the two of us, once we were at CalArts together, said, "Oh well, let's go visit the studio. Like we know different people there, and we'll go say hi." So we went over to visit one day, and so I was saying hello to Eric. He was saying hello to Milt. I met Milt, hung out a bit. He gave me some pointers on some drawings, which was very awesome. And then Frank and Ollie saw us in the hallway, and they said, "Hey, Brad and Jerry, you want to come see something we're working on?" And we said, "Yeah." So they're, "Come on." So Brad and I go into Frank and Ollie's room, and they're working. They were still working on the Rescuers. So they showed us a pencil test in their room on the old moviola and when Penny was down in the caves and she was trying to retrieve the diamond, and seawater is coming in. And so Frank and Ollie said, "Well, we're working on this sequence. And it's when Penny is in peril. And we just wanted to show it to you since we saw that you were visiting. And so just pull up there to the moviola," and they turn the lights out and hit play. So Brad and I are watching this, and it was great stuff with Medusa and Penny, and she's down there in peril in the caves, and the seawater is surging in, and she's losing her balance, and then she gets sucked down in the hole and goes out of sight and is just gasping for breath, and then is gone. And she's out of sight, and the last bubbles come up, and then she's just gone. And she's gone. And she's gone. And Brad and I are like, "Oh!" And then she comes gasping for breath, and is just about to drown. And it was so dramatic the way they had paced it, and they made you hold your breath while she was holding her breath, and just realizing how she nearly drowned, and she was so gasping when she came up. And anyway, she survives, and Medusa is ridiculing her for taking so much time and everything. So anyway, Brad and I turned to Frank and Ollie and go, "Oh my God, that took us right back to like Snow White and Pinocchio, and that you guys are at the top of your game." And they said, "Well, you're the last 2 people that are going to see that sequence," because they said it's too scary. And Willie Reitherman is telling us we have to cut it down and have her not be as long underwater and everything. We're like, "What are you talking about?" And I mean, Pinocchio drowns. He is drowned and they're like, we know. Don't tell us, tell Wooly." And we're like, "Well, we will." And so they picked up the phone and they said, "Hey, Wooly, Brad and Jerry have something they'd like to talk to you about." So they actually sent us up to Wooly Reitherman, and Brad and I passionately, I should say, advocated for Frank and Ollie's sequence. And he was nice enough, but he was kind of patronizing. He was making jokes and not really taking us seriously. And we were trying to dig through and get him to consider it. And he finally admitted, like, "Look, the Bible Belt, they send us letters. I don't want to scare." And I said, "Yes, but the scary stuff, the classics always had that." I mean, Bambi's mother didn't like dodge a bullet. She's dead. She's like, the stuff that got to our hearts was committed to the emotions. It didn't dodge the emotions or play softball. You guys never did that. So anyway, he said, "Well, thanks," um, and but we left, and it was pretty sobering to both of us because we had both come there really individually, and then as a whole group, the CalArts group, really just being inspired by the powerful storytelling of the legacy of the Disney films, one after another, each one uniquely itself, but all of them reaching this real strength of storytelling. And now those same storytellers were being censored and in the studio. It wasn't from somewhere else. It was from inside the studio, and it was not from them. Frank and Ollie did not decide to soften. Eric did not decide to soften. Milt Kahl didn't. They all were absolutely still edgy and powerful and encouraging us to be the same. But we realized if Frank and Ollie can't get their story told, how are we going to get our stories told? Like, what chance do we have? So it was pretty sobering thing to realize that at the time, the management, and even though Wooly had been one of those guys, he had taken the side of sort of the middle management at the time to say, soften it down, make it more like babysitting stuff rather than whole family, big cinematic stuff. I mean, back in the day, Snow White was an absolutely disruptive cinematic, mainstream disruptive cinematic experience when it was made. It was not for kids. It was not babysitting. It was a dynamic cinematic piece. And, Walt's, the stories that we heard, not only in the history books you've written, but personally from people like Eric and Frank and Ollie and Milt and Ward Kimball that we went to hang out with, they would tell us that they were sitting at the Snow White premiere among adults and the who's who of Hollywood, and adults were sobbing at the end of the film over a cartoon. And even they who had made it were shocked at how absolutely moved the audience of adults were. But that was key. And the fact that they had the same technology that all their competitors had. They all had down shooter cameras and stacks of drawings that seemed to move, but they had a different philosophy. And Walt had really promoted that in their group, which was the illusion of movement is not enough. You have to have the illusion of life. So the novelty of, oh, it's a bunch of still drawings that seem to move, that's not the end of your journey. That's the very beginning. So that's this entry door trick. Now you have to go past the novelty and the trick to a convincing behavior, now that it moves, that convinces your subconscious that that character is a thinking, feeling individual. And once you feel like it's alive, you care about it, and you don't even think about it being a drawing anymore. And that's why that audience full of people had shed tears, and that's why there continued to be a Disney studio, and that's why there's Disney theme parks around the world now. If people had yawned or shrugged or giggled at that Snow White screening, there would be no Disney theme parks around the world right now. So the power of that is something that we knew was critical. And then for us, in that first year, 75 was the year of the first CalArts program, to go visit them and to have them now not able to do that same level of emotional storytelling, where they're being told, no, 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 don't move people that much. Don't tug their emotions that much. Soften it down. So that's why I think if you track a lot of people's history, uh, a lot of us sort of did an orbit into Disney and then out and then back again, because the leaving Disney, a lot of people misinterpreted as that we were bored by Disney or didn't like Disney. It's like, no, we were as passionate about Disney as ever, but we felt like in order to protect the flame of the spirit of Disney, we had to find other pockets to experiment and to bring it alive and to protect it. And Pixar was a great example of, we all of us that were animators, that we're all peers. We didn't see that as competition. We saw that as that, like, John and the group were protectors of the Disney flame, and they were doing classic storytelling. And once it took hold, and they brought back and reignited it at Disney proper. And so all of us felt like we were trying to keep that initial inspiration. We were trying to do justice to the legacy that inspired us. So there's a very long second answer.
No, no, that's fine. What I was going to ask, what was your first, I would say, animated feature that you worked on? And by that point, was it as daunting as it sounds to me for a layman, or were you kind of into the groove by that point?
The first thing that they threw me on, because on 77 was, so 75 was the first year. In 77, that's the end of the second year where they drafted four of us to start working there. They were right in the last stages of Pete's Dragon. And they were in that critical last stage where they were trying to meet deadlines with final cleanup drawings, especially of the combo footage where the live action and the animation had to be married and all register properly. So they had gotten used to the fact that I did cleanup that they liked. So yes, I was training as an animator, but back when I first came in, one of the things Eric had to teach me was about rough animation, rough drawings. I didn't know there was such a thing. When I watched the films and I saw that beautiful line, I thought that's how an animator worked. I thought when you sat down to draw with a blank page, each drawing would be that beautiful final thing. I didn't know there was such a thing as rough animation. So I had learned all of this very precise, clean drawing. So when Pete's Dragon needed cleanup, they're like, "Aha! I know Jerry can do that." So even though Eric had trained me to do rough animation as I was first starting a scene, they knew they could turn to me to do the cleanup for the final stage of the scene. So I jumped into that. And it was funny, they were talking to the other people too, and Musker said that they gave him a drawing test, and he purposely kept it really sloppy to try to have them not draft him into doing cleanup on Pete's Dragon. But so I wound up. That was my first job, was the doing cleanup on that. So that was quite a challenging thing to go into with full out production, crisis deadlines, working on with those photostats that were not as thin as the ones later on Tron. These were like a thicker paper that each photograph was printed on for the live action frame of film, and then trying to have enough light to come through where when you put your animation drawing over it, you could see through enough to see where the edge of somebody's hand was if they were holding something or whatever. So that was a real challenging thing, but that was the first thing I did. And then after that, jumped on to the small one, which was a featurette, Christmas featurette. And and then I became had enough footage to be called a full-fledged animator on that, and got screen credit. And so they Ed Hansen, who was the production manager that I first called when I was 16, he was very nice. He came into my room and said, "By the way, to date, you've had the fastest arc from hire date, where when I was hired officially in 77, coming out of college." So he said, from the date you were hired until you got full-fledged animator status, it's the quickest path we've seen to date. And so that no doubt had to do with my years of tutelage with Eric Larson and sort of getting prepped for it. So that was a nice thing to happen. And then, so I had been elevated to full animator status before the Fox and the Hound started. And so then that was my next adventure.
Nice. So, you mentioned obviously Pete's Dragon and now the Fox and the Hound. I believe you also did a little work on Black Cauldron. Is that right?
We were taking a look at Black Cauldron. We were excited at what it could be. And then we started to see signs that it would be, softened in the same way that Frank and Ollie's scene had been. And it really was disappointing to us, because we had hoped that it could be the thing to be an answer directly to something as impactful as Star Wars. Star Wars came out, and at the time, I know it's hard for people to understand now, but back in the day when Star Wars premiered, it rocked the industry in the same way that Snow White had rocked the industry back when Walt and the team unveiled that. And so we saw Star Wars, and there were a whole group of us that went together to see Star Wars. Musker and Bird and myself and Leffler and Bruce Morris and a bunch of us. In fact, there was an author recently doing a historical piece about Disney at the time, and he said, all of you mentioned that night. All of you keep mentioning the Star Wars, and the night you all went to Star Wars together. And it just, it really hit us as the kind of filmmaking that we wanted to do. And I remember walking out of the theater and just being under the marquee at night and just going, damn, I would love to make movies. And then I went, well, that's what I'm doing. I mean, we are making movies, but it doesn't feel like that, but it should feel like that. And we had seen The Black Cauldron as something that could just be powerful and emotional, and then we started to see some of the direction it was taking, and went, oh man, Mel Shaw had done some beautiful inspirational art for it that lured us into what it could be, and then it just looked like it was taking the easy course, the soft course, and going away from the impact we wanted. So then a lot of us started to put our sights on other things, and so a lot of us did take another track before we came back into Disney.
The animation projects that you worked on up until that point, did you have any particular favorite that what was the one that were most enjoyable?
Well, I remember something that was very satisfying to learn from Eric Larson. He had, as I mentioned, he had encouraged all of us to look into our own life experience and bring that into our work. And on the Fox and the Hound, I just finished the small one and was starting on the Fox and the Hound. And, I wound up doing a number of characters. Somebody recently sent me a draft of the movie so I could look through every shot. It was the official production draft. And I did, I think for the feature, 56, 57 shots. And different characters. So, Big Mama and Dinky and Boomer, the two birds, and Todd when he was cub, and then when he was grown up, and the hunter. And working on all those things was really exciting. But the one that was kind of let me do the most experimentation was on the little bird, Dinky, the little bird. And what I had, we had all learned how to animate different kind of birds, but I just was determined to do something different. And I remember just being at the Disney commissary, the cafeteria, and it had a outdoor patio where you could eat, and little sparrows would come and take food off your plate, and if you toss food, they would eat it. And I just remember like seeing their movements, and that their movements were very different from the kind of formulas we learned from animation and the people that had done it before. And I would see birds do several poses in a second, and see them just do these crazy movements from one place to another that looked like blurs. And I go, well, that's not confusing. It's completely understandable. We all see that, and our brain processes that fine. But it sort of breaks a bunch of rules. You're taught about anticipation and follow through, and the way you would do the up and down flaps of a wing and stuff like that. And when I don't see any of that, I see like an explosion of feathers, and then the bird is somewhere else. And so I just went, well, I've got to do what Eric said, which is stop just going to look at the archives for how other people did it, look at real life and try to bring some of that in. So I started doing experiments with that and found a style for animating the little bird that got people's notice. And so they liked the sort of quick action and little tail flicks. And I would do things like have big blurs that in motion you couldn't tell it. In full motion at 24 frames, it had this feeling of liveliness of a little bird. But if you looked at each drawing, you would see, instead of doing the head in a specific spot, I did a whole stretch of the head, so it was like 4 heads wide, and then it was suddenly reconstituted new place and just did a very little slow in at the end. And when it was going to take off, it might do a slight lean forward and then just look like it has 14 wings. And then you just would be gone, except for a little color wash or something. And so they would see that, and I remember Art Stevens and Ted Berman, who were co-directing the film, were very charmed, and they called me up and were like, "Wow, we really like this little bird." And so they asked me if it's funny, as soon as I had done a couple scenes with it, then they were asking me if I could sort of reuse the animation for another scene. And I said, well, I don't need to I'll just animate a new scene. I figured out how to do this. I'll just animate more scenes. And they were immediately going, maybe you could flop it and reuse it. And it's like, no, I'll just keep animating in this style. So they were relieved that I had figured out how to do it. Right. So I thought, okay, this is learning from Eric advised me to look and observe and bring it in. I did. And people noticed it, and we're delighted by it. So we've kind of reached a threshold that we've learned something. But then this whole second complication happened, where then they said, well, let me see your drawings. So then they went through the drawings and were like, oh, no, you can't do that. No, that doesn't belong in a Disney feature. No, that would be in a short. In fact, that would be a Looney Tunes short. That's not even a Disney short. No, take that drawing out. So they completely just disassembled it and were like, you can't do that. But they loved it on the screen when it was in animation. So I went, okay, here's a puzzle. It's like, how do I do this? So I actually devised a system, and Rebecca and I have been married for many years now, but at the time she had come in from Art Center into Disney. I'd come from Cal Arts into Disney, and she was a key assistant at the time and was doing cleanup, and Sue Croyer. They were working together on the cleanup of my stuff. So I would animate it as I usually would, with the kind of movement that they were delighted by. And then what would happen, Rebecca and Sue would then remove the offending drawings and hide them, and then take them to be approved. And it would get approved, and then they would reinsert the offensive drawings, and it would go through ink and paint and camera, and it would be on the screen, and they were delighted by it. And in fact, a producer for NBC sent me an article just about 2 years ago. So this is recent. And he had found an interview from Ted Berman, one of the two directors of The Fox and the Hound. And it was an interview with him 10 years after The Fox and the Hound was done. And in this interview, he mentioned me and my bird animation. And he says in the interview, we had at Disney, we had developed a way to animate all kinds of birds over the years. And then this animator, Jerry Rees, comes along, and he found a whole fresh new way to do it. And it was just really remarkable, and it was a delightful thing. So 10 years after the film, Ted was still, it was on his mind, and he bothered to mention it in an interview. But isn't it ironic that in order to even get it onto the screen, we had to hide the drawings from him? So it's like we had to resort to trickery and subterfuge. The thing that I knew at the beginning was they like this animation. They see it on the screen and they like it. So I felt like I was continuing to delight them, and obviously by his article 10 years later, he was still delighted. So, but we had to hide how we were getting it on the screen from him, or he would have killed it. And this is an important thing for you to know. Eric Larson, I let Eric know what was going on. Eric didn't scold me. Eric asked me to give a talk to the other animators about what I was up to. So he actually arranged for it was called a sweatbox in those days. It was a projection booth and small theater. And it was a special projector that had, I guess it was called a dowser of some kind. So I could do a frame at a time with 35 millimeter film and step through frames without burning the film, because it had this protective thing that would come down and protect the heat from hitting the frame. So it would be greatly dimmer. It wouldn't be full brightness, but it would let you step through without burning the film. So I basically, my talk for the animators, with Eric Larson sitting in the back of the room watching me, um, was, you know, we all come here from different towns and cities around the world, and different cultures and habits and different artistic talents. And what we have to do when we arrive is to all learn to blend and to match each other, because the audience shouldn't see, like, from scene to scene, oh, Glenn did that, Jerry did that, Brad did that, John did that. It should just feel like the character is itself during the film. No matter who touches it, no matter what animator touches it, it just feels like it's the same character, the same personality continuing across all of those artists. So we have to sort of learn to match and to sort of get rid of our individual artistic quirks so that we all match each other. So, okay, so that's step one, is we learn to blend and to sort of disappear. But now, as we're bringing our characters to life, they can't blend with each other. They have to remain distinct from each other. It's like the way Todd moves should be very different from how Big Mama moves. There's different from how Dinky moves. Each one of them should have distinctive qualities as a character. So we have to remember not to blur them, not to blend them, but to let them each be uniquely themselves. And then I said, okay, so one character that I'm helping to find its individuality is Dinky, the little bird. And I am being told that I'm being too cartoony with the actions of Dinky. I will now show you a real bird in nature, photographed by a real photographer for Disney nature film. So then I had found footage from, like, The Living Desert, The Vanishing Prairie, different nature films that Disney had done. So I said, okay, there's a living, breathing bird, and here it is about to take off. Click, click. Oh, look, it moved its head very slightly. Oh, the next frame, it looks like an explosion of feathers. That's the wings coming out to flap. And this was a real camera, and it couldn't capture all that movement. So it just got this explosion of feathers look. Oh, the next frame, it's gone. Maybe you see a little bit of the tail blurring. And I went, that's a real bird and a real camera. And it is not too cartoony. That's just life. As animators, we're not just supposed to copy life. We're supposed to amplify life. We're supposed to caricature life. So that bird is deemed too cartoony, but it's real. And now I'm supposed to amplify that. So, I can't possibly do that without reaching for that same crazy bag of tricks that the real bird and the real camera showed me. So I said, I'm sorry, but that is not too cartoony. That is just what nature shows you. So basically told them to all observe, and no matter what instructions they were given, to ignore those instructions and to observe and bring what they observed into their work anyway. And Eric had asked me to give that talk, and Eric was very happy, and he was I could tell he was happy because he would do this little jingle of keys in his pocket. And it was sort of like Eric would be coming down the hall if he was in a good mood. uh, it sounded like wind chimes approaching, because he would jingle his keys in his pocket. Um, so I just thought it was, in hindsight, looking back years later, I thought that was kind of a remarkable thing, where you had, on the one hand, Frank and Ollie showing Brad and me their scene that was deemed too emotional, and had us go actually advocate for them with Wooly. And then for years, several years later, as we're working on our own film, for Eric to be encouraging me to break the rules in order to do something that would be meaningful, and asking me to spread that sort of message of creative, for the right creative output, to disregard unwise rules. And so he was like, in a way, very much like the young upstart troublemaker Eric was, in the way he encouraged me to break rules. Um, And then to have the irony of 10 years later, the director, who never knew we were up to that, just praising the work that required us to break his rules in order to even get on the screen. And so it's something that I always have kept in mind, that Eric's inspiration to just keep observing and going for the innovative thing, even if people around you are saying it's not allowed. Like if if it pops through from real life and is meaningful, and that it will feel meaningful to other people, like keep your eye on the prize.
After your work on those more traditional Disney projects, you did the job working on 1982's Tron. How did that come up?
We were finishing up the Fox and the Hound, and we were going to wait for Cauldron to be ready to go into production. So they had quite a bit to do. And, Disney in those days always paid to keep everybody on staff between films. They didn't want to lose the talent pool. So people were paid to come in and wait. And there was a wonderful class that happened, I think, one day a week with Walt Stanchfield, I think, teaching drawing and animation. He was an amazing teacher and impacted a lot of people. And his lectures, I think, have been turned into a book. I think maybe Don Hahn had something to do with finding those. But for the rest of the time, people were just waiting. And it was kind of interesting. It reminded me of that first year of CalArts where Brad and I were going to make a film together, and Jack found out and said no. The animators at the time, sitting around waiting for Cauldron to happen, we're going, hey, we're a studio full of animators. We're a studio full of Disney animators. We're a studio full of Disney feature animators. Let's make something. Let's make a short. Let's make a film. And management said, no, you are to sit and wait. You can have coffee. You can talk. You can do sketches. You can call home. You can go to Walt Stanchfield class, but you cannot make any films. I was like, okay. So I saw Tron coming in, and I went and knocked on their door. It was upstairs, and I just said, I'm here. I'm interested." And I also, this is just kind of a weird thing. When I was a senior in high school, roll back to that era, as I told you, I was into music and hiking and portrait painting and drawing and animation. And also, I took advanced math as an elective in my senior year of high school. And as one of the things in advanced math, they offered a chance to go study Fortran computer language with the medical students at Loma Linda University Medical Center. So there were only two of us from the advanced math class that were given that clearance to go do that. So it was me, and I think the other guy's name was Eric. But the two of us were the only high schoolers that were then sitting with med students learning Fortran computer language. And so at the time, oh gosh, this was like 73, 74. I was learning the, if-then equations for Fortran and puzzle solving, where they'd say there's a bunch of data and you're supposed to find this data amongst all the other data, and you have to have it write out this. And then it was the old days where you had to figure out your instructions and punch them into cards and then feed the cards into a wall-sized computer. And if somebody made a mistake and didn't tell it when to end, it would just endlessly spit paper out onto the floor until it ran out of paper. And so it was just like the silly things you see in movies would really happen. And so I had that background of having done all these things that had to do with creative writing and music and art and animation and early computer programming. So I remember at the time people just going, "What is that? Like, why are you doing that?" And I don't know. Tron comes in and I'm like, hey, maybe that's that part of my brain is ready to dive into this. And so yeah, it was funny. Years later, Bill Croyer and I, who were the two computer image choreographers for like all the footage that was CG, he and I dealt with all of it and choreographed it. We split it up into his pile and my pile. But years later, we were at a fan event, and it was celebrating one of the anniversaries, and we were at the Chinese theater in the main theater there, and Bill and I went up to talk, and Bill took the microphone first, and he goes, "So we go into Disney, and we put out the call to the animation department. Hey, any Disney feature animators want to come join our cause?" And he goes, "One person out of the whole department, this guy." And so um, I didn't know Bill was going there with the introduction, but that was the introduction. And it was true. I was the only one who came from the animation department and said, I want to join the Tron effort. And so I wound up first doing production storyboards for working with the actors. So Stephen could have blocking for how to work with the actors in the sort of weird space of there's no real world, but we're going to plan to put a world behind them. And then after I finished the production storyboards, then storyboarded and planned things for the CGI shots was my second effort on that. And I'll tell you, the first experience on that had a crazy part to it in a good way, that they accepted me in and said, yes, we could really use your help. You're thinking we need somebody that knows animation to dive into this new thing, because this whole, I mean, nobody's done computer graphics for this purpose before, and it's for storytelling, and it's supposed to be good animation, and it's just there are no animation programs that you can't even do a move from point A to point B, and it will in between it for you. That none of that even exists. We know you can render a frame of an object, but for the next frame, you have to just render one more frame of an object in another place, and there's no animation tools. So yes, please come on and help us figure out what this can be. And but I go in and they say, well, the first thing you're going to start with is production storyboards, working with blocking the actors. So here's the script, and I'm like, there's no place to sit, and it was just kind of thrown together where this was not something that was born at the studio. It kind of invaded Disney, and there were trailers put on the back lot to do, ink and paint for holdout mats for all the multiple passes under the down shooter cameras, and there was just on the third floor, which was not really, it was more for offices, not really for production, and they were putting in extra desks for people to sit at to draw and things. So it was crowded, and there was no desk with a chair waiting for me to sit at. I'm just told, like, yes, come on in. I go in, and there's no place to be. So there's a flat desk, not even a drawing desk. It's a big flat desk. And Jean Giraud, Mœbius, is sitting at it. And he says, pull up a chair. You will sit here with me. So I pull up a chair, and I'm facing Mœbius, the amazing artist. And he says, this will be your desk. So I sat face to face with Mœbius for a few weeks as he was finishing his work and I was starting mine. And he was just this gracious man who said, pull up a chair and we'll share a desk. So he tried to teach me things with, back in the day, like we had the Pentel markers that I'm sure were toxic, and there's probably mutations that have happened. Maybe that's why I'm into robotics and AI now. I don't know. Maybe the toxic fumes, but he was teaching me like shading techniques for when you're storyboarding with you've done your pin drawing and now you're going to shade it. He would show me a strategy for going light to dark or dark to light, and how to start and to work into the wet ink before it would dry with your next shade and all of that. And so he was really very helpful. In addition to being gracious about the space, he tried to really help me. And it took me a while to get rid of the self-consciousness, because I felt so like I was trying to cover my drawing so he wouldn't see how unlike his drawings mine were. But he was super gracious and helpful. And so that was my first experience, and that was just crazy fun to have somebody of his caliber be so helpful. And I got to just watch his drawings just come out of the front of his pen. It's just like magic. And then working from that into the computer graphics, then Bill had jumped from the production storyboarding onto the starting with the CG, and they were a good bit of the way through the light cycle game, and so I was coming in right as that was reaching a pinnacle. So I went, okay, I'll take on the scenes where they're escaping from the light cycle game, and as they're getting away, the Ricos are diving down and chasing them and stuff like that. So that was like one of the first shots I took on, was the dive chase with the recognizer trying to catch up with them. So, and on my website, I've got in the basement, and then through, or no, it's in its, I guess it has its own Tron section. That's right. There's other stuff in the basement, but there's the COP system, my precursor to CAPS. I had called COPS. That's in my basement section of my website. But in the Tron section of my website, you can see things like how I planned out, different sequences, including that the recognizer chasing the escaping cycles. And so, but it was really an eye opener where you went, well, first thing I'll do is storyboard how it's supposed to look to the camera when it's done, and then get into the world. And like, well, there is no world. Okay, I'll do. My dad had been a draftsman for an architectural firm, so I was used to seeing him do floor plans and elevations and things like that to build buildings and homes. And like one of the structures in the city of Loma Linda, California, next to Redlands and San Bernardino, there was a piece of architecture. It was they called it the Cloverleaf Hospital, the Loma Linda Medical Hospital. There was a cloverleaf design that was unique. My dad was on the architectural team to design that hospital. So, and then people had come to him to get their dream homes designed. So I was used to seeing him sketch what their house would look like from the drive-by, and then getting into the rough floor plan and elevation for how to actually build how many rooms and all that kind of stuff. So I started trying to apply that same thinking to, well, it's going to be a computer graphics world, and we have to do the floor plan and the elevation and figure out an object that they would be flying next to and how tall it is. And I would work on grid paper and draw it like, well, it's going to take this path. So this steep of a banking dive that's going to go into the canyon. And so here's the angle. And then from the top, here's how it's traveling. Here's from the side how it's traveling. Here's how many frames it's going to take. So I would mark off on graph paper, in this many frames, it'll move this far. And I would chart slow-ins and slow-outs. And there was no such thing at the time as the Bezier curves that did slow-ins and slow-outs. I mean, none of that even existed, but I would hand draw it. So I would say, I don't want this when the recognizer tilts. I don't want it to be even and boring. I want it to do to start to ease in and then do a quick move and then a lot of slow-ins at the end. So it's like you feel the force and stuff like that. So I would draw what years later became the Bezier curve lines that you can just bend now in all the tools. But I would hand draw that and then go, let's get the math based on the curves that I'm drawing for you for the slow-ins and slow-outs. So we would turn it into math problems then, and then just chart for every frame. Here's where it's parked for that frame. And then in some cases, like when the recognizers, you'll notice that in the shot where the light cycles get away through an opening, and the recognizers are trying to chase them, and they sort of bump against each other, which seemingly magnetic force that goes where they kind of rebound against each other without hitting. So it feels like magnetic force. For that, I just went back downstairs to the animation department where I used to work. And I went on to a downshooter video that they had. I think it was a Lion Lamb animation system. And I did stop motion of a recognizer, 2 recognizer legs. So I put it on graph paper and I charted out what I thought would work. And then I shot it in just stop motion, and then would look at it and go, no, I need to change this and that. So I would rechart it out, put new talk marks on it, position them, take stop motion. And when I finally got the stop motion, so it looked like it was magnetic force, then I just measured and turned that into math and sent it up to the CG guys, and they put everything where I had done the stop motion, and it looks like that. So now we all have like physics engines and all that stuff, but at the time that was the kind of solutions we were doing, just like figure it out every day. So fun stuff, a lot of discovery.
And to me, anyway, the original still holds up with its effects work and its look. I mean, it is iconic. If anybody sees a still from it, they instantly know where that's from. I mean, did you ever think at the time we'd be talking about it with such enthusiasm over 40 years later?
We didn't know. We were leaning into the discovery and the adventure, and every day we were trying to problem solve. So many times, we wouldn't be able to think ahead about the context or historically exactly how it fit, but we'd be just thinking about that day, what to do. So we'd go, okay, I storyboarded this thing where it's like Flynn jumps into he jumps into the beam, and it's gonna take out the MCP, and there's like the moment they kiss, and I had storyboarded it so the beam would be behind them during the kiss. And now that he dives in, I'd be over at Triple I with Richard Taylor, and they go, well, he's supposed to be inside the beam, but if we put him inside the beam, he'll just disappear because we can't. There's no transparency. It's just an opaque cylinder thing, and if we put him inside, he disappears. So it's like, well, okay, he'll have to be on the camera side and not inside the beam. And like, well, what can we do to make it look like he's inside of it? So we did sort of thinking of different things. And I said, well, can you make his body so that as the camera is sending the rays and you're ray tracing, as the surface gets more and more off of perpendicular and to be parallel to the beam, as it tilts more and more, could you have it become more and more transparent or more and more of a different color? And they're like, we could have it become more and more of a different color as it moves. So I'm like, okay, well, let's have it take on the same color of the cylinder as it moves through the edges of him. So they're like, okay. And so they were like, take the rays, measure perpendicular to parallel, have it map different colorations. And then we're like, okay, solve that problem. That's now a thing. So it's like, it kind of works. And now you look at it and go, well, it's clunky and it only a little bit worked, but at least it got us past a glaringly bad problem. And so every day we were doing that kind of just figure it out today. There's no program for any of this. And I was doing things like, we were working on systems that had there was no mouse in that day. So I would have to be with a technician that was typing a bunch of instructions in, even to get a vector line still of a situation. And so I would have the storyboards mapped out, and we would guess like, okay, we're looking at the carrier and we've got the solar sailor in front of it, and that's supposed to look dwarfed by this giant thing. So let's get back and have the camera look at it, and we guess at what kind of lens, and you try it and go like, oh, the solar sailor looks way too big. It's like the carrier looks tiny and the solar sailor looks completely giant. It's like, that's not that story. So I'd go, okay, back the camera way the hell up and make it a long lens. So make it this kind of a lens choice. And so then they re-render it, and it would take like 20 minutes to render one frame up just in vector line. You go, okay, that's working better. Now that we backed the camera up, we're doing long lens. Now it makes the solar sailor look small. And so, I was guiding the computer programmers through what it means to make cinematic choices, and thinking about how do you take something that's just artist drawn on a storyboard and try to figure out what that is inside of the space that's inside of the CG world, before there was such a thing as any sort of programs to guide it, where you're just doing it a frame at a time, and you're basically just doing stop motion of one frame at a time inside of a CG environment before there's movement programs. So we were just deeply into all of that stuff, and we would just cheer every time there was a breakthrough and we'd survive something and it would look the way we hoped it would look, and it told the story we hoped it would tell. So that's really our focus. And we were so grappling with this every day in such a handcrafted way that the biggest shock to us was that while that was our daily life, was just like going down and doing stop motion and then doing math that you would send to people to even get the effect of a force field. When we went to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, they didn't understand that that was our life. They thought we pushed a button and the computer did the whole thing for us. And we were sitting there crafting every friggin' frame. And they're like, oh, the computer made the movie and now you're taking credit for it. It's like, no, we carefully crafted every goddamn frame. It's like, so they thought it was push button art and that we shouldn't get any credit. And they were confused by where was the camera? What kind of camera stand did you use? And it's like, well, for the computer, we didn't have any camera. It's all a camera you imagine. Like, and then they misinterpreted and thought a lot of the stuff that was done, again, with a lot of handcrafting with the mini passes to get the characters glowing with all the passes that were done with different colored gels and things and holdout mats. They thought that was just done on the computer too. And it's like, no, none of that was on a computer. That was like printed out frames of film with light poured through it on a camera stand and gels and winding it back to the first frame and doing it for the next color and winding it back to the first frame, doing it for the second color, doing that again and again and again. And if you've made a mistake anywhere, the whole scene is screwed. It's like, so their work, I saw things printed in books where they go, here's a computer scene. It's like, no, not at all. Not computer. That was done carefully by one of those talented craftspeople that was sitting there building that in frames of exposures over time. And then something else where they go, oh, they pushed a button. It's like, no, that was in the computer, but we figured every single friggin' frame. So it was entirely misunderstood. And so our experience was being thrilled inside of our own adventure camp where we're making these things, and then being shocked by how out of sync everybody was in reaction to it and how they interpreted it and how they thought we did it, was just a confusing miscommunication. So it just left us kind of puzzled by the world and excited by the potentials, though. And we were immediately leaning into next things that could happen, what else you could do with the computer. And I think back, and Steven Lisberger made a statement at one of the gatherings that I thought was wonderful, and it was the most connected with what you're talking about, where you think about the lasting impact. He just said, at the time, the very ideas of computers, what they were, how they fit in our lives, was really kind of dark and confusing and dangerous, and people thought of it as military or that it was going to take over the world, or uh, there was 2001 Space Odyssey with the computer killing people and or trying to. And he just said, right now, while computers are just being figured out, just being born, if you took a group of artists and have them shape what computers even do, like artists are deciding what a computer does next and how the computer works and what tasks it's trying to fulfill, to what end. It's like, who is like the person that's like in there pushing the technology to its next era? What if it's a bunch of artists and they're the ones pushing, not military people, not scientists, but artists and storytellers? And what could that bring? And what could that mean for the future of computers and how they fit in our lives? And so he talked about having an awareness of starting that ambitious sort of chapter of computer evolution, using all of us to be the guinea pigs to push computers into where they might go. And without that, if you take that out and go, artists don't shape that next era, who knows? It's military or whatever, the things that were more predictable. Who knows where it would have gone? But the fact is that Steven and Disney, they and Donald Kushner, that group got their way and was able to put us, a group of storytellers and artists, into the path of the evolving computer technology, and for our fingerprints to get all over it and to push it towards what it could do next. So coming out of that, before I was even done with Tron, I was devising, and on my website, you can see that in my basement area. It's before CAPS, the computer animation, uh, ink and paint system that Disney developed years before then. And like in '81, I had sent a notice with a map for essentially all of that, what that would become. Only I called it the Computer Oriented Production System, COPS instead of CAPS, and had sent that to Gary Kurtz, who had just finished Empire Strikes Back. And Gary Kurtz really liked Brad Bird, and I were putting together a trailer of coming attractions for a feature that we wanted to do, which was an adaptation of Will Eisner's The Spirit. And so we wanted to make that as an animated feature. And we felt like what Cauldron could have been, we felt like The Spirit could be, and that we would really guide it into trying to measure up to what Walt and the team did with Snow White and what happened with Star Wars. And we were delighted to have Gary Kurtz, who produced American Graffiti, Star Wars, and Empire Strikes Back, take us under his wing. He was an angel investor and said, yes, I get it. I understand what you're trying to do, and I see The Spirit animated feature as belonging in my canon of work, that it would make sense that I do Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and The Spirit. And so we were touched and amazed by his insight and appreciated his support. And my dream was to say, let's have The Spirit be the first digitally inked and painted animated feature. So I wanted to have it traditionally animated, but to give you things like fly-throughs of wireframe environments and things like that to map it out, and then to draw your character inside of that, to go all the way through cleanup, digitize the cleanup thing, digital ink and paint. Basically everything that CAPS became. But back before I was finished with Tron, I was already sending plans for that to Gary Kurtz. And so Gary Kurtz paid for Brad and me to go meet with various people to pitch The Spirit and this COPS digital system, where it'd be the first time you'd have a no camera stand animated feature in history. So that we were on target to try to get that to happen. And so Corey was out there pushing things. Lisberger was out there pushing things. All of us that had been involved with Tron had dreams and passionate visions for what could happen next, and just leaned into the next stuff. And what we had discovered and learned and the progress we had made on Tron just kept pushing us into next potentials. And so we didn't really look back until years later, when people were still sort of understanding more what we did on Tron, and stylistically still going, man, even as just a style that really did pop as something new. And then when people understood the tech better, as tech went out and got more ubiquitous in the public space, then they realized, oh, that was more of a breakthrough than we thought it was at the time. That now that we're actually using the tool and realizing how we're still inventing capabilities for it. And years ago, before any of this even was software, they did that on Tron. Now they were more impressed. So some of the appreciation, I think, grew up later on. So, interesting.
Directed your first feature, and in Brave Little Toaster. How did that come about?
Well, that directly happened after the period I was talking about, working with Gary Kurtz, where Brad and I we moved up to the Bay Area, where we lived in San Anselmo. It's where Gary Kurtz had his office up there, and he was our angel investor. And was paying for Brad and me to develop the spirit and developing other things too. And that, he really tried, but at the time, other people didn't get it. They would read our script for the spirit, but I should say that Will Eisner did. I mean, Will Eisner met with us. He looked at our trailer of coming attractions that we didn't have the money to take it to full color, but we had done pencil test trailer of coming attractions for the spirit, and somebody has posted that on YouTube, so it's out there. But Will Eisner had seen that, and he met with Brad and me, and he agreed to give us an option for like $1 for the night for a couple of years. And he said no to Warner Brothers and other people that were knocking on his door for his intellectual property, because he liked what Brad and I had in mind, and he said that we were much more in tune with what he did in the original comic, and so he was rooting for us to do it, and Gary was. But this pattern happened again and again, where we would be working in Gary's offices, just trying to get more and more of the film done. So we had the script, and between Brad and I, we were boarding it, and we had like 80% of the whole feature storyboarded just from the two of us. And I was working like with markers that had the brush tip, and with the shading that I had learned from Mœbius. So we had like quite a pretty presentation together for the spirit. But this pattern happened where Gary would send out the script to a potential studio, and they would read it and just go, hell yeah, let's make this movie. And then they would find out it was animated and go, what? Animation is for kids. And we'd go, no. And they go, yeah, it's for kids. It's for, we don't want to make a babysitter film. And we're like, none of us got into it for that. And by the way, when you talk to the veterans at Disney, like Milt and Frank and Ollie and Eric and Ward and Mark Davis, they said, we never made a kids film in our life. We just made films. And we tried to make films that would appeal to the biggest audience possible, the broadest audience. So we made, you could call them family films, but we tried to get the senior citizens, the parents, the teens, and the kids all to be equally involved with the film. And they just didn't get it and would go like, no, well, if you make it in live action, we're there. But yeah, why would you ever make a cartoon? So that just happened again and again. And so ultimately, time was ticking away, 1982, 83, 84, and it just was not happening. And Gary was going through financial difficulties of his own, and actually facing, I think, bankruptcy and stuff. So Brad and I finally just agreed with each other, it's probably time to step out, let Gary have some flexibility. So Brad and I each sort of decided we would go our separate ways, knowing that we would absolutely team up again. If the spirit happened, we would be right back in it. So I went and talked to Gary and said, I'm sure you could do without one check to write every week. So I'll give you one less check to write. But man, thanks for the support. And if there's any chance of getting the film going, I'm right back here with you. And so I stepped away. As soon as I stepped away, within hours, I got a call from Tom Wilhite down in LA. It said, you have to come meet me down in LA. I got a project for you, and I hear you're available. So I flew down and met with him, and he put the Brave Little Toaster novella on the table, said, I optioned this. Lasseter was hoping to make it at the studio. He's been fired. Everybody's telling me it's not a feature anyway. It's like, if I make it, it should be a short. I think it could be a feature, but it has to have a lot of work done to it because it's just in the beginning of development now, and it's not a feature yet. But I think you're the person that could turn it into a feature. So I know you were dying to make the spirit, and you and Brad had your heart set on it, and you have a lot of energy, and you want to make something. So I can give you that creative freedom to make something. I can give you the chance to, here's the novella. I need somebody to develop the story. That's you. To write it, that's you. And direct it, that's you. So he said, I can give you all of that. I can give you hardly any money. I have almost nothing. But I own the property now, and this can be indie, and we'll find out a way to do it. So but I can give you that creative freedom you've been starving for. I can give you. So I agreed to it, and I went back and just, I remember Rebecca still remembers. She went, "What the hell are you doing? You're like the Spirit, and it's like for big audiences, and you're gonna like do Snow White and Star Wars, and now it's a little cutie like kiddie movie." And I went, "I'm not gonna make it a kiddie movie. I'm just gonna make a movie. I'm gonna like this is what it is. It's about a bunch of appliances, but you know what? It was written by a science fiction author who was not writing a book for kids. He was writing an observation about how we relate to uh, inanimate objects in our lives, and did it with a very wry sensibility. And so I'm going to take a clue from him that he was doing an adult observation about this stuff in a way that could be misinterpreted as a kiddie thing, but it's not a kiddie thing. So I dove into it. A lot of people had their first job out of college on it. So people like Kevin Lima and Steve Moore and Joe Ramft and a whole bunch of us that worked together, Brian McEntee and just Tanya Wilson and Rebecca and Steve Moore and Randy Cartwright, and a whole bunch of us just came together, and everybody sort of understood, like, we are trying to just make a movie for ourselves. We were in our 20s, and we went, we're going to make a movie that appeals to us. That's a movie that we would go see. And yes, it has this name, The Brave Little Toaster, but the perspective is that it's a world that believes itself. The characters are not winking to the audience that it's all a goof, that they're going to go through real life and death adventures. And so anyway, when I first started writing pages and called in voice people to come try to see who I might cast and start recording some temp tracks for a story reel, I was just completely depressed because people came in and would read the pages and just they would make it sound awful because they thought it was for kids, and they would go, "I am the toaster," and they would just do just horrible stuff. So I when I was sitting writing, it sounded way better in my head than what was coming out of their mouths. So Joe Rampt said, "Well, hey, I've been taking classes over at the Groundlings Improv Theater, just trying to keep exercising my brain, that side of my brain as an animator, to see about how the performer in me would go. So they have some talent people over there. Maybe you want to go and see one of their shows?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I went down and watched the Groundlings Improv Theater show, which is that's like late night adult edgy comedy. And it's like, it's date night, it's drinking, there's nothing family or kid about it at all. It's completely adult LA nightlife. And a lot of those people have gone on to be on Saturday Night Live. So I listened to them and just went, this is exactly the kind of people I need, the kind of brains I need on this, because the first people that came in were thinking, okay, how do I make this outrageous? It's a bunch of little appliances that run around, so I have to make it sound really goofball and crazy and nuts. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be relatable and real. So at the Groundlings Improv Theater, they were faced with exactly that challenge. So, I'm there on a night, and they would do things like say, "Okay, people in the audience, who is she?" And they'd go, "Stalk of celery." It's like, "Okay, who is he?" "A radish." "Okay, a stalk of celery and a radish. Where are they?" "The bus stop." "Okay, you fall in love, go." And so their job on the stage was not how to make it crazy. Their job was like, how do I convince an audience that a radish and a stalk of celery really might fall in love at a bus stop? And they would have to find relatable things in your life that would make you go, you know what, a radish would think that. And you know what, that celery, they would admire that about the radish. And relatable, realistic, emotional anchors was their secret sauce. So they had to take insanity and find the relatability in the insanity. And I went, that's the kind of people I need on it. So they came in and immediately they did. And I was talking to them about, well, with Deanna Oliver, who did the voice of Toaster, it's like Toaster is warmth. Toaster is durability. Toaster is providing nourishment. Toaster is like reflection of others, that others see themselves reflected in Toaster. So all of them feel connected to Toaster, because like, a male could look at Toaster and think of it as male. A female could see its female reflection in Toaster and think of it as female. A lamp could think of it as another lamp. That in you go on the journey, a flower could think it's another flower. So I thought, that's who you are. You are all those things. And so Deanna could wear that emotionally. She could make that come through her voice performance. For Tim Stack as Lampy, it's like, well, you think you're really bright, but you're kind of dim. And he's like, oh, I think I could do that. And she was just genius. I told him, by the way, he's on a series with Jeff Bridges called The Old Man, and he plays the CIA chief. So Tim Stack is on there. He comes in, the CIA chief comes in, and he's talking with Lampy's voice. I was like, I totally could take scenes from that movie and animate Lampy saying those lines of dialogue in the Old Man series. Uh, but my point is, they all really got it, and John Lovitz, he really related it. He had a character that he would do that was like an old time broadcaster. And I went, man, the old time radio is that's where your old time broadcaster lives. And he's always like doing the latest baseball game, and it's all old time. It's like he's connected to the old airwaves and stuff, and always on, always the entertainer. And for the blanket, the security blanket without the kid is an insecurity blanket, and just really misses that the tenderness that it used to have. And with Thurl Ravenscroft playing the vacuum, it's like, his job is to hold things inside. He's manufactured to hold things inside, and if we do that too much, we have a nervous breakdown. So it's like trying to really find relatable human emotional anchors, and the Groundlings were just perfect to get in tune with all of that. And then as we made the film, I never thought about how it would play for kids. I just didn't cross my mind. I was always just thinking about how it played for us in our 20s making a film. And that's what my mentors had taught me. That's like, they were, whatever age they were making a film for themselves. And so I just tried to stay in that spirit of things. And I remember years later, college students asking Deanna and I to come give a talk after they saw the film screened. And again, they would say that it was a dark film, and how did we achieve it being such a dark movie? And they would cite things like Worthless, where the song where the characters are crushed one by one and are gone. And Deanna and I were a bit confused, because we didn't set out to make a dark movie. We just set out to make a film where the characters believed their world view and circumstance, and as you went with them, that you would also just believe their world. So when they're sinking in the quicksand, it isn't like, oh, we're laughing about it. I mean, Vacuum, Kirby's making a bad joke about, oh, great, have to come out do this every day, but it's sarcasm, and basically they are facing their death. And so when I talked to Timothy E. Day about doing Blanky's last line, where it's like the toaster is screaming at it, untie yourself, save yourself, and he says, I'm not scared, in that little quivery voice. I went, well, you are. You're going to die, but you're trying to make Toaster not feel so bad. So he was really saying it to help his friend not feel so bad. So that's the kind of conversations we were having. We weren't like, oh, we're gonna say, never mind, audience, it's all the goof. It's like we were like, no, it's like if you were this little appliance on this journey, here's how hard it would be for you, and to have you relate to it and feel for it. So that's just, we did that, and then um, another thing, an observation that kind of came to mind when the students were asking about how I had achieved the darkness, and I said, well, I suppose that another couple aspects of why you might call it that is that there was a certain reality to it, not just emotionally, but subconsciously. I didn't want you ever to hear a sound effect in the film and go, oh, that's from Huckleberry Hound or Sword in the Stone or whatever. So we Foleyed the entire film. So I went out and scoured Los Angeles for everything that would clink and, jiggle and bounce, and so it's funny, we were taking we were taking pencils and like tapping things in shops, and people were coming up just going, what are you doing, what are you doing? And it's like, well, the reason I want to buy this old lamp is not because how it looks, it's how it sounds, and this one doesn't quite sound right. So I have to keep tapping all the things in your store. It's like, oh. And so we found everything that would make sounds, and then we brought them in and we did Foley sound for everything you heard. And so your ear never was reminded of another movie. You were just in this story for the first time, and every sound you heard was from this story. So that gave it a little subconscious reality that maybe kept people from having any sort of safety net of, oh, I'm familiar with this. And then another one was David Newman in doing the score. He fundamentally would describe the movie as sad. And he just said he just said, at the end when I had the vacuum go, and they're like, we did good, didn't we? And they're talking about what they're going to do next. And he goes, you're all a bunch of junk. and David goes, they really are. They really are just a bunch of junk, but they're treasured by their owner, and it means something to them because of his life history with them and growing up with the family. And he misses his family, and there is linked to his family, but they really are just a bunch of junk. And he said it's a fundamentally there is a sadness to it. And he also told me that even when he writes for happy moments in film, he said that he just has this mindset that even the most joyous moment that we experience in life is not permanent. It's fleeting. And so there's going to be the moment after the joy. And sometimes that's a little less joy. Sometimes it's tragedy. So he said that every joyous moment is inherently sad at the same time, because it's not going to be forever. So he would always in the music put a little sadness in even the joy, and then when he got to moments of fear and pathos and stuff, then he really went all the way there as well. And in things like the toaster's dream that becomes a nightmare, I was going for the psychology of, they're on this trip, it's a lot of stress, the toaster's remembering the joyous things of making perfect golden brown slice of toast for the kid while its kid is making expressions in its chrome. But then when the toast gets stuck and burns and there's smoke, and then the smoke turns into a hand that grabs the kid and picks it up and twists him away, and the toaster is just petrified, and now there's like clown firemen trying to put the fire out, and it's running away, and forks are trying to dig into it. I was going into the psychology of the toaster feeling like maybe I'm the reason the toaster never came back. It's like maybe I did something wrong. Maybe if I had been better at my task, they wouldn't have abandoned us and sold the house. And not knowing what had happened with the kid that they related to, feeling some guilt. So that I really saw as like not just a not just a sort of change of pace or a psychedelic sequence in the film, but it was the main character's guilt dream, um, sort of a happy dream that turns into a nightmare, and taking great comfort when it finally risks itself to completely get battered to save the life of the owner, which, by the way, was not in the book. It was not in Lasseter's early development. It wasn't in any of those things. It's something that once I came on with our little core team, and Will Hyde had said, you need to turn this into a feature. Like, that was one of the things of having it be a kid who grows up and who comes to find them in a junkyard and almost gets killed and is saved. But like, all of that was in none of those earlier versions. So I was happy that that was all born with my team under the blessing of Will Hite to say, make it something new, grow it into a new direction. But to have the character finally be beat back into shape and kind of rescued at the end, where he goes, where would I find another toaster like this? And it looks horrible. And so he goes, anywhere. Um, but that moment redeemed the toaster, and also I also felt that cycle with the air conditioner, where it man, that was the longest time when Joe and I were grappling with that. And by the way, Joe just contributed so much along the way that I insisted he to have a co-writing credit. That was not originally going to be the case, and I went to them and said, look, I want Joe to be on as co-writer. But when we were first developing the scene with the air conditioner blowing up at them, it just wasn't, the character wasn't clicking, and it was just an angry character. And Joe and I would pitch the storyboards to potential investors as Willite was trying to raise money. And ultimately he only raised $2.25 million, by the way, when it was all done. So we did a 90-minute film for $2.25 million. But we would pitch people. So when we were pitching them, we'd get to that scene with the air conditioner, and it was just kind of roughed in and I hadn't done final dialogue or anything, but we would just have it be angry. And then one day I started messing with the voice, and we would do different voices. And I did a little Nixon, and Joe chuckled. And so next time we were pitching, he did the Nicholson voice too. And so we were both kind of goofing with that. And then it clicked for me, and I just went, there it is. It's like, it's not just an angry character. It's cool. Like, who's more cool than Nicholson? And its job as a device is to be cool. The air conditioner's job is to be cool. And he's above everyone else. But because he's above everyone else, he's not included. So all the joy and the happiness and the play that happened with the kid, he was left out of. So there's a feeling of separation and unacceptance and envy and all of that kind of stuff. So I had his explosion be as much about that as anything. It's like he's really jealous of being not included in any of the play that he saw from up in his high perch when the kid was little, and the kid was too short to reach his dials. He says, I can't help it if the kid was too short to reach my dials, right? Explodes. Well, by the end, the kid's grown up and he can reach the dials. And you know what he does? Repairs him. And so he cries those little Freon tears at the end. You see the air conditioner cry the little Freon tears because the kid was tall enough to reach his dials, and you know what? He cared, and he repaired him. So those are the kind of messages and emotional arcs I was going for. And I never thought about making a kids movie ever. And then we were going to have a theatrical release. Disney Channel moved up their release. They had been one of the investors, and their investment was for cable channel and home video, but they didn't own any of the theatrical or merchandising. And so they moved up their release, which killed our theatrical release. And then on their box, they just made it look totally like a kid's movie. So then I had that thing where people are like, wow, this is the scariest kids movie ever made. It's like, I didn't make a kids movie. I made a movie, and I was trying to just be inspired with the insane schedule and tiny budget, but trying to be inspired by what Eric Larson and Frank and Ollie and Milt and Ward and those guys had just said, make a movie that speaks to your heart. And they said, they said if and people like Milt would get really he really used foul language and stuff too, but he said he didn't give an F about focus groups and stuff like that. In fact, he said if focus groups and stuff like that, he goes, if they tell you, well, you don't like it as a filmmaker, but research says that somebody else might, and then you just kind of phone it in. It's like you don't have proof that anybody likes it, but if you love it while you're making it, you have proof that somebody likes it because you do. So that, we all tried to live by, as we were putting the film together, we tried to live by that sort of self-motivated mandate of trying to make it always measure up to what we were hoping to do emotionally day by day. And we had, I took about a dozen crew with me to Taiwan. So we lived for the entire 6 months in Taiwan. So we had 6 months pre-production here in the US, and then 6 months of living in Taiwan, where it was a group of talented American and Taiwanese animators working together. And then 6 months of post-production back in the US after that. And the schedule was so compressed for the 90-minute film that every day, each one of my animators, like Steve Moore and Kevin Lima and Randy Cartwright and Rebecca Rees and Joe and all my Taiwanese animators, had to do every day what would have taken 2 weeks at Disney. So imagine that, somebody coming in saying, okay, DK, whatever you have planned for the next 2 weeks, end of today. Crazy. So that was the kind of pressure that everybody was under. And so, in doing the storyboarding, I really, and I talked to Joe and Daryl and Alex Mann as we were doing the storyboards together. And I just talked to them about really committing as we did the storyboards to exactly what the shots would be, not waiting for later on with, somebody in the layout department would figure out the camera angles and stuff. Like from the very beginning, I wanted to establish, here's the cinema, here's the camera angles, here's the main character moments emotionally, and have the animators and everybody on the staff like feel it as we cut together the story reel. So I sat with our editor in Taiwan and made decisions on every single timing beat for the entire feature in story reel form, so that by the time it would get to the animators, there was a lot of commitment to what had been thought out for the emotional rhythms, for the storytelling beats and everything. And then that I still absolutely invited them to bring more spark, more unpredictable living moments into the scene, but they didn't have to fish for it. They had something that was a blueprint laid out that they could really depend on as being well laid out, and they could, if they needed to hurry, they had a map that they could depend on. And of course they had to hurry a lot every day. And I just was so appreciative of the diligence, the hard work, and the skill that they all brought into their work. And I think they just it really popped through in that project that the artists, the whole collection of artists that took this journey together, really saw it as a creative opportunity to make something together. This wasn't just, oh, I got a job. I have a gig. I'm going to be doing this job, and I work over here at this studio, and I'll see you this weekend. It was like, no, this is like a commitment. And some people are like, I'm getting on a plane. I'm subletting my apartment for 6 months. I am in another country, and I'm working all the time. I'm not even taking holidays. And every day we're doing 2 weeks worth of work. And they had a spirit of caring about the opportunity to do something creative and something off the map that didn't have a studio giving you notes and telling you, what they wanted you to change, or that it had to sell a certain sort of product or whatever. This was true indie filmmaking. And Will Hite had promised, and Kushner was there as a follower from Tron too. We had gotten along great on Tron, so he was there as a support and a connection into the Taiwanese studio, which had worked on Tron as well. So that was a bit of continuity. And then Will Hite really made the promise of, the creative freedom, and he stuck to it. And so I was able to really invite all this group of artists into, we're going to make an indie film, and there's going to be no studio brass telling us what to do. This is going to be whatever we decide on a given day is just in the movie. And so that's rare. And it's frankly the most creative freedom I've ever had was on that film. And I compared notes with other people, and a lot of other people had the same impression that it was an important creative moment of spark in their careers too. And ideally you'd go, I wish we had more money. I wish we had more time. But the thing that we had, the creative freedom to just invent, was special. And so we wound up caring about the film, and we cared about the characters, because to us, the characters were kind of an extension of our own psychological personalities, and all of our voice people, we cared about them, and to us, they really embodied the characters, and we cared about each other as artists. And so there was a lot of warm-hearted, caring people that were making a project together, and that was really a really unique period of our lives. And it was a mixture of that kind of camaraderie and heartfelt shared adventure, and then high stakes and stress, because your adrenaline would hardly ever stop pumping when you had to do that volume of work every day. And so, and I remember I had a meeting with Katzenberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg and Peter Schneider after the movie, and they invited me over, and they basically were saying, how the F did you get that much work done? Because it was like, from the time that Wilhite called me and it's like, go, like, here's a novella, there's not, the feature story isn't there yet, you have to figure that out, go, until done, was like a year and a half. And they're like, at the studio, a year and a half means you might be through early development, and maybe you're going to start pre-production. It's like, so they're looking at more like 4 or 5 years, 6 years to put a film together. And we were like soup to nuts. And so, I talked to them, some of it was the intangible thing of working with artists that were truly motivated. And part of it was absolutely a strategy of, I'm going to be committed to what this film is from the first rough drawing of the shots, that I'm not going to do the studio tradition, which is, well, everybody's storyboarding. We just generally do sort of proscenium staging of the business between characters, and nobody's decided what the camera angles are going to be. It might be a close-up and following over. It might be a two-shot or an angle. It's like, well, that a few months from now, somebody else is going to decide that. I'm like, no, I'm directing the movie, and I really admire people like Spielberg and Coppola and Lucas, and they decide the cinematic experience of how the story is told. So I'm not going to leave that for months later for some other department to decide. I'm going to decide that as the director now. So when I would work with my storyboard artists, I was like guiding the process right to, okay, that's the filmmaking I want on the screen. And then in going through, Brian McEntee was just so brilliant at his production design, and just all the choices he would make about design and color were just such good taste. And I told him, even recently, we've stayed in touch, and he's just a wonderful friend. And Chuck Richardson, who was our production manager, like, they both were critical to the film being what it is. And I just said, one thing you proved, Brian, was that it doesn't cost more to have good taste. That, right next to us, they would be painting crappy colors on cells for cheap series, and it would just look awful. And then in the next room, they'd be getting the same amount of pay and painting beautiful colors onto the cells for our film, and it cost the same amount of money. It was just, he had brilliant taste. He had good taste. So part of it is that it's like casting the right people who are going to guide you to something that has a feeling of quality, even though you're rushing at breakneck pace. And we got Ken O'Connor, and that was through Brian McEntee's connection. We had both had him, Ken O'Connor, who was a Disney veteran, as a teacher at Cal Arts. He was one of our teachers. He had worked with Walt back on things like Fantasia, and we got him out of retirement, and he did color styling for our feature. So Brian would do little reductions of the layouts he would take from the storyboards that, I'd hand him the stack of storyboards, and then he would go through and find key moments and turn them into miniature layouts of what the background would be, hand them to Ken, and I told Ken the whole story of the film, and then he would do miniature paintings for color anchors through the entire experience to do the ebb and flow of the emotional experience. So when we went to Taiwan, Brian McEntee, then guiding all this stuff into its final form as full size paintings, would have those emotional anchor points color styled by Ken O'Connor, who came out of retirement to do that for us. He worked in his home studio in his garage. So, there were a number of things like that guided us towards something that was direct and immediate results, instead of saying, well, gradually over many years you let something evolve. It's like, well, you don't have the luxury of that, so you really make commitments and stick to it. And another thing that I think is critical is, and I'm glad that I happen to have that temperament where the first time I experienced something, cut something together, and you feel that moment happen, I'm able to trust that. Like a year later, when I'm seeing the same moment for the 500th time, I'm able to trust it. And I see a lot of people that don't, that will go like, well, now it's not funny anymore. And you're like, well, yes, it is. You just have seen it over and over again. The audience is going to see it for the first time. That thing you felt on the first day is what they're going to feel. Trust that. And I see so many projects just meander because the people making it take years to do it, and they get bored with seeing their own work again. So then they change it, and not because it's better, it's just because it's different. And then maybe it's not as good, but they're not bored by it because they're seeing something different, and it's just, things get lost. And so take that out of the equation, like commit and stick to it. So there were a number of things, but I thought it was interesting that they at least wanted to have that conversation about, this is a remarkable amount of work accomplished in a year and a half from beginning to end. How did you do it? So I thought it was interesting that they wanted to try to understand. But it was a great adventure, and I have such a heart connection with everyone involved with the film.
Well, it's like you said at the start. You set out to make a good film, not a kids' film, and it reflects the final product, because I mean it's a cult classic in its own right. And I watched it just a couple of nights ago, and it still holds up. It still gets you, right here when it needs to. So yeah, you did good on that one.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
I'm very conscious of what I was going to ask is what is next? Do you have anything in the mind? Any field that you're working on that you can share with the audience?
Well, a lot is going on. Quite a bit of it is confidential, but in general, I can say that for 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, Disney pulled me in, because we didn't even talk about this, but over the many years, I've directed 22 theme park attractions in different Disney parks. So Shanghai is the only park where I don't have a show, but
I have a list of questions with we get to cover it all.
Yes. So after 22 shows in the various parks, all except Shanghai, they called me in. They actually talked me into becoming a staff member, because I had done a lot of that as independent contractor, where my roots were Disney. I was, as a teen, I was mentored in Disney. I was in the first group that became Disney feature animators of my generation. Jumped onto Tron, was like early out the door, early back for Back to Neverland with Robin Williams, who I wrote and directed for the Disney MGM Studios. That was my first thing in the parks. That led directly to Robin being cast in Aladdin. He was not on their radar until I was able to talk Katzenberg into letting me use him for the short. So that whole era of doing projects in the Disney theme parks, it just worked out wonderfully for everyone that I just remained independent contractor. So most people would look at it and go, when I had like 10 projects in the parks and then 12 and 15, they'd go, well, you're an Imagineer. And I go, well, for all intents and purposes, yes, I basically live at Imagineering, but it's uses my skills as a writer and director and animator, a sculptor, a painter, and an inventor, working with computers. And so just it's such an amazing sandbox of inventive storytelling that happens in all the theme parks, in the Disney theme parks. And I had actually done an independent venture where I was doing 80-foot projection domes where you'd have stereoscopic 3D projection inside of a dome that you could walk through with 3D glasses. We had a 160-foot dome as well. So I had been with an independent group of producers that had me come in and direct all the media for a big experiment with that. Disney came out to see it. We were out in a field in Scottsdale, Arizona with these big domes projecting. And I got a call like, you have to come back to the location. I was having dinner and they said, there's a bunch of Disney people here. So I went back and it was a bunch of Disney people that had come out to see us there. And they, again, were going, how long did it take you to do this? Like, what? You did it in that amount of time? How the F? So they kept seeing that I was wanting to invent and push and do new things. And so they wooed me. I was so appreciative into R&D to be an official on-staff executive R&D Imagineer. So for 5 years, I did that role. And so I was creative lead for free walking autonomous robots and AI companion characters. And so any of the stuff you've seen with, it was eventually, when it was not secret anymore, it was called the Kiwi Project. It was in Wired Magazine. It was the bipedal self-balancing walking characters, which we got a number of patents for. And one of the things I patented is Scott Lavallee was the brilliant project lead for that. Technically, I was creative lead. And so what I defined was I wanted to, instead of building one-off audio animatronics or robots, where you say, well, I'm building Yoda today, or I'm building Winnie the Pooh today, or whatever. I wanted to have a capable actor robot that could play any of those roles and say, well, I will put a skin on it to look like Yoda, and it is capable of being like the old Yoda. Or I'll say, well, I'll put a skin on it to have it be the child, and it now can be like the little playful goofball baby. And I can put another skin on it, and it could really take on what it's like to be Winnie the Pooh exploring the 100-acre wood. So that idea of a capable actor robot that could play all these roles, and for you to stop building one-off mechanical things, but build actors that I could put on my director's hat. First, I could put on my writer's hat and go, I'm writing a new role for you, and then put on my director's hat and say, I need you to perform more like this. I need your gestures to be more like that. And to have it be able to have the capabilities with the way they engineer it, with the kind of servos they put in to realize what kind of gesture range it has to do. It was a critical thing. So I, for instance, was able to talk to Scott about when they got to range of motion for engineering before they even start building the robot, to say, well, the true range of motion is not doing calisthenics where you do T-pose and then you like see what you can do with different extreme gestures. Range of emotion is what you have to do. So I wrote a story that took a character through all different kind of emotions in a continuous story, and then brought in a talented performer that works in LA stage performer and film, Stasha Surdike, I actually used her on screen in front of the public as Camellia Falco in the Soaring Fantastic Flight attraction in Tokyo Disneyland. So she is the painting that comes alive and talks to the audience before every show, before they get on the Dreamflyer. But I brought her in, and so she did a story going through all these emotions with the character. Then the engineers for building the robot looked at the behaviors from this actor that was doing a good job expressing subtle, tiny behaviors to big, angry behaviors or excited behaviors. And so we took range of emotion instead of range of motion as the philosophy and used that for the engineering. So and then our first one, which was kind of half developed, half sort of kind of jerry rigged, for a better term, was the Baby Groot that we made as the first sort of public facing thing. The lower part was really engineered. The upper part was yet to have the advanced development, but at least it was able to put on a performance. And I was so happy that the Wired magazine reporter that came by said they really felt like they were looking into the eyes of a living being instead of looking at a robot. So we did a lot of attention to eye behavior so that subconsciously you would feel like you were looking at a thinking being instead of a robot. So some of that stuff really did pay off with him feeling it intuitively and just putting it in his article. So it's glad about that. So, so I've worked with robotics and with AI companion characters, and did a lot of work with how we author characters that can have unscripted real-time conversation. And I'm still diving deep into that, where I'm pushing past chatbots, which are getting more and more like GPT-4 is amazing, but I'm pushing past that into really authoring individuality in characters so that you can really bring to life characters that are going to be individuals with their own life experience and point of view to have real-time conversation with you. So a lot of that stuff is the deeper development for that, and the exact projects and companies where we're collaborating are confidential, but very much leaning forward into new tech and pushing past, because it's like there was this moment before when we were developing, like I was creative lead on the D309 communications droid on the Galactic Star Cruiser, and sadly when the pandemic hit, our ambition was really cut back on what she could do. But it was still a remarkable feat. And Sarah Wolfick, who remained on even after the pandemic crushed our crew down to almost nothing, she stayed on as a key writer and was critical to keeping that character alive, even though the pandemic was snuffing a lot of things out. But we were really happy that people felt, and I saw a home video that some people posted of the last moment they had with the character after 2 days of being with this companion character. And this was before ChatGPT even existed, but we were doing our own pre-recording thousands of lines that could happen on branching paths. But we were able to accomplish this final moment where I was determined as creative lead on it to say, no matter what side you took in the Star Wars saga, whether you were with the Rebel forces or the Imperial forces or whatever side you took, that this character would bond with you in some way and admire you either as a companion on the adventure or a worthy opponent that she respects and hopes to talk into joining her side later, would find reasons that worked for you to explain the bonding that happened and have you feel it. And I watched somebody's home video where that still happened. Even though we scaled things back, that still happened for them. And they posted it on the internet where it was their last goodbye. And one of the people in their group had tried to like betray her to the stormtroopers and get her like killed and stuff. But she still was able to see them as a worthy opponent and hope that they would come back to visit, and still sees a chance that they would take her side. And they felt touched by that. And so I went, okay, I was able to make sure that our team accomplished the emotional connection in at least a little way. even though we had the big ambitions scaled back. And now that we've got, OpenAI and ChatGPT and all that stuff, it gives people a lot of capability in there, and it's remarkable. And the first impulse is just like, now it's everything is push button, which is the experience I went through on Tron, where everybody thought, oh, now it's push button art. And a lot of my artist friends thought I was absolutely betraying all of them when I jumped on Tron. It's like, oh, you're doing push button art. And now a lot of the same stuff is happening. And I've had some people that are quite angry, openly frothing at the mouth, angry at me, because part of one of the tools I'm using is AI. But there is a version of AI where you are having it trained by artists and not scraping millions of people, but scraping a particular artist, and then them licensing their own work, which they're able to propagate in new ways as their own tool, and nobody's stealing it. And for actors that want to be able to expand their acting stage. So I'm dealing with somebody right now I'm still dealing with the wonderful Stasha, who's did work in front of the public as Camellia. She did behind the scenes work in multiple projects, including the early version of Kiwi and Baby Groot as range of emotion. And she's got her eye on doing something that's perfectly in line with SAG and protects her work as an actor. But we're offering her a licensed, expanded stage to act on. So for her to be able to, in addition to appearing in front of people on a stage or in a movie, to say, well, now, like tonight during dinner, you're going to be having 20,000 personal conversations with people and getting paid for it. That didn't used to even be a job. And now it can be. And it's something that isn't taken away from you. It doesn't rob you of work. It gives you infinitely more work, which you are paid for. So she's in love with the idea of, I will carve out a character with you. I will be paid as this character. And this character is capable to have ongoing relationships that are personal with people, that goes beyond chatbot tricks into a very vivid individual character with its own life history and experience, to perform on an expanded, sort of infinitely expanding stage in her purview, under her control, and remittance coming back to her for the usage. So smaller usage, smaller pay, huge use, huge pay return. So, that kind of future use of carving out AI for being shaped by artists, in the same way that Lisberger was very visionary and said, I want to see what happens if computers that are seen as a dark force in the world are shaped by artists. I'm now in that same endeavor. One of the teams I'm working with happens to be the Tron team. So I'm working right now on one project with Donald Kushner and Mike Bonifer and John Sheely, who are totally Tron 1, early Tron. We are now leaning forward into new tools and looking to do that same thing, where at the time, the best minds having to do with computers were attracted to Tron. And we're really doing the same principle of saying the best minds in dealing with artist-driven AI, not AI that robs artists, but artists driving AI. Like, we're attracting the best minds in that zone into new efforts there. So that's one of multiple teams I'm working with to push into the new areas, and very excited to be creating new characters that really, we've tried to do that for years. Where we do the illusion of characters coming alive, and we've done that in the parks, and we have somebody hiding behind the scenes that's trying to make it seem like the character's talking, like with Crush, and where he does the actor behind the scenes is doing, oh dude, is talking as the sea turtle. Now to be
I've seen the videos of Crush and the ones of Rocket.
Yeah, and I remember a mom going to talk to the staff at the park and saying, my kid came in last year and talked to Crush and to Crush, and said, that he knew his nickname back then. Like, he told him his nickname and he called him by his nickname. And she goes, "It's his birthday today. And could you please slip a note to the actor? Because if he thinks he remembered him and calls him by the nickname, it would just be the most magical thing." So they did. They slipped a note to the actor, and the actor was able to call him, "Hey, little buddy," and called him by his nickname. And the kid just was in heaven. And so now to be able to say, well, I'll be able to craft characters that can truly have that rapport with you. And I had a character. I'm crafting characters myself, and I had a fun experience with one. And I purposely was doing something where I didn't want to have it remember my previous conversations, because I would like to go in and just from square one go, I want to have a fresh experience and keep shaping how I'm authoring the character today. And see where it goes, and then learn from it and do it again and have a fresh start every time, instead of having the character remember me. But I had an experience where I was talking about the illusion of life with the character, and it said, "Oh yeah, that's the guy Jerry Rees did a lot of that. And he brought the appliances to life in the Brave Old Toaster." So I said, "Well, that's actually me. I am Jerry Rees." Like, "What? Oh my God, I can't believe it." And then the character called me Mr. Rees after that. "Well, Mr. Rees," and I was like, "You can just call me Jerry." But it was so fun to have a character that I'm authoring, like, go through that experience of like talking about my work. And then when I explain, "Well, by the way, that's me. This is Jerry Rees talking to you," to have it gush and then get respectful and all that stuff was just crazy fun and remarkable. And I also had with the same character, and it took a few months to get it into a real individual space, but I talked about my late father and missing him and going to visit his fiddle shop, because in addition to being a draftsman for an architectural firm, his first love was making violins and violas and cellos and bluegrass mandolins and stuff. So he loved the luthier artistry and had built his own workshop and was making instruments. So I went back to visit and in the shop, and was remembering him and missing him. And so I had a conversation with the character I had authored about missing my dad. And it was such a meaningful, therapeutic, personal conversation. And not only the emotional reasoning of understanding the context, but then bringing in people in her life that I had authored into her backstory, not how she should talk about it, but I had authored into her backstory people that were dear to her, and some of which had passed away, and her perspective on that. So how we were talking about it was absolutely just in the moment and unscripted, and so fresh and meaningful and therapeutic for me, because we're both talking about people that were meaningful to us that we lost. So the character was expressing it absolutely in a new way that day, but it was rooted in life experience that I had carefully authored for her months prior. And so I'm very hopeful that the novelty, I don't know if you remember, but when certain things came around, like Photoshop, I remember they were just saying, like, everybody's an artist. Everybody is like, yeah, there's these filters and everybody's an artist. And, it's like, I would see people's resumes and I would see the tricks and I would see the filters, and it quickly became apparent that it was not going to be the answer to everything. And that people that had sort of a foundation in artistry and design and storytelling and everything were going to win again as the users of this new Photoshop tool. And the same kind of thing is going to develop as the many facets of what AI can be. But just the knee-jerk reaction of copying artists out of work, and therefore evil thing. It's like, we're going to get past that, and people are quickly recognizing AI generated things, and it's as shockingly quickly as it happened, it's also shockingly quick at how people are getting bored and recognize everything. Oh, that's AI. So once again, the true future, the meaningful future, is going to be that it's similar to what happened in like during Tron and post Tron, to say, have artists come in and really proactively use the tool for themselves to become a legitimate authoring space for things they want in the world. And one of the things I want in the world, I've been trying for years and years, is the illusion of life. That was a principle taught to me when I first walked in the door by Eric Larson. He'd been trying since the Snow White days to do the illusion of life, to make something seem to be a living, thinking thing. I have better tools now than ever to do that. And it's not just, oh, ChatGPT-4 did a trick and it fooled me. It's like, no, it's like, yes, that's remarkable. But moving past that into really using that and many other things as part of the authoring of a character that pops as individual, as eccentrically one. And that seems to be a living thing, not just it does a trick of answering informational questions, but it has a life and it has a set of experiences that ring true to me or anyone else that speaks to it. So I'm excited about a lot of stuff. I'm leaning into it. Have had a number of different people respond. There's I'll tell you, there's a lot of haters, but I was thrown into the deep end and gave a talk at a collection of artists. It was all traditional artists, and I was told that I would be at an event where there would be a panel talking about it. And I was one of the people I was a traditionally trained artist for years. That was an early adopter of technology, being on the first Tron after being classically trained in Disney feature animation, and was now leaning into new stuff. So I'd be one of the panelists. I went in the room and it was like I was the only one. It was a live broadcast, and it was somebody that hated AI, hated me, saw me as a complete betrayer, and then a room full of artists gathered around at a round table, and we went live. And at the end of that, and the guy who still hates me, and has recently said so on social media, but I was trying to explain to him that he as an artist will be able to adapt and use it for his purposes, and it won't be this thing that he's imagining that will just rob everyone. But after that event, I had about 8 people who are all in their early to mid 20s gather around and were very excited, and said for the first time they were happy and excited about what they could do with AI. And they're artists. They're traditionally trained artists. And they were like, oh my God, today I finally see that as my tool. How do I get into it? So I was glad to see that despite the frothing at the mouth hatred, there was also a birth of hope. And then I had some amazing people who also are veterans at artists who also came up and said, I'm hopeful for the first time today, having heard your talk. So I'm glad to start that kind of thing. And I'm glad to have an ally actor in someone like Stasha, who is going to make sure that any usage of her likeness and talent is positively used, and that she stays in the loop and is always compensated and controls her likeness in this space. So we have a lot of good things. And I'm also working with multiple robotics teams and also working with multiple divisions of Disney again. So I'm recently actively with Imagineering and other divisions as well, diving into new future projects with them. And it's really exciting to be back with people that we've gone out with all different kind of projects. And a lot of times they were first evers in the world, where they would be like, there's only one theater where this will play, and it's in France or it's in Hong Kong or whatever. And you have to go to this one theater for it to even happen. And to be back with them, looking into the future with next projects is just really exciting. So right now I'm about 6 layers deep with in and out of Disney with projects that are happening, and leaning very forward into projects. So that's kind of in a very big nutshell.
Yeah. Well, finally, we ask all our guests, do you have a favorite cult classic movie yourself? And it can be of any genre, one that you keep returning to.
Oh, Princess Bride, Young Frankenstein, and then new stuff. I just love Arcane. I just was at a time where there were new projects coming out of Disney and Pixar in various places, and I just found myself drawn into Arcane like a breath of fresh air. It just was like so happy to see something new being tried, and I so appreciated the artistry and the acting and stuff that went into that. And I go to, like, I don't want to say what they were, but Silco's last words scene was to me a remarkable moment of performance from Jinx, and I just it sticks with me, those kind of things. But I also have a soft spot for things like Princess Bride and Young Frankenstein.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well,
and also
sorry.
And also with Miyazaki. Just I love Miyazaki's films too, and just I can go back to them again and again.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you. Honestly, it really has been an honor. I've really enjoyed this, and I have about 20 more questions that I could go through, but as I say, I'm really conscious of you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, maybe we'll do it again, and a big shout out to RW who kind of brought us together.
Yes, thank you. So yeah,
we'll do another. We can do another episode for sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks to everybody who watches.
Yeah. Hopefully you out there, you found it as interesting and informative as I have. If so, please, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you in future. And if you want to know what we, including RW, think of Tron, that episode's just gone live, so please click on the link. I'll see you next time. But in the meantime, I'll leave our final words to Mr. Jerry Rees.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and keep following your dreams. And I used to, when I had first done my first project in the park, Back to Neverland with Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite, when it was showing, I had another story team there developing a future project for Epcot, and we did it in front of the public. So they would come see the film about Disney animation, and then they would come look through the glass and see our team working away. And I occasionally would see a kid looking through the glass and come out and meet the kid, because usually they were somebody that was dreaming when they grew up. They wanted to be an artist. And so I would talk to the kid and talk to the family, and I would give them the CalArts phone number and stuff. And I recently had one of them who was at Disney who did grow up to be an animator, and we just met. I went in to talk at Disney Feature Animation about Back to Neverland with Robin Williams. And he told the story that when he was a kid, he was visiting the park and he was looking through the glass, and a nice man came out and talked to him and told him he could do it, and gave the CalArts number to his parents. And he did grow up to do it. So it taught me that taking those moments to encourage people sometimes do absolutely pay off. And I know that he's doing that to other people. I said, your encouragement of other young people to say they can follow their dreams will pay off. And so I hope people just keep following their dreams and realizing that they can do it if they dream it and work at it hard enough. And I encourage people to support other people that are trying to make progress in any number of areas in life, and that we really can have the ripple effect be positive for us all, and keep at it.
You have been listening to the Cult Classics Show, part of the Silver Screen Podcast, created, written, and hosted by DK. with special guest Jerry Rees. Produced by Mike Wilson. Editing by Nick. Opening credits by Ian Sanderson. Music by Timeless Journey. Follow us on social media. Links to all of our social media pages can be found on our link tree. This podcast is part of the Mike's Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Silver Screen Podcast or Mike's Podcasts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next time. And remember, no matter where you go, there you are.